All right, Chapman. So a lot has been happening this past week. You made chicken macaroni and you spoke before the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So big things for you, but big things for the market as well. What was that? Where did you have to speak before the CNSC? If that's
So I was giving testimony as a part of the work I do with Generation Atomic. They call them interventions in Canada concerning the license extension for New Brunswick Power's Point Lepreau nuclear generating station. It's a
mm,
single CANDU unit, CANDU 6, I think they're about 600 megawatts. It's a small CANDU. It's not like the big ones at Bruce. So, and we were giving basically testimony. Actually, the crazy thing is that we went first. I went first. Like, so literally the um, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff members who had this, and this was like the first time that they were doing this in public because this was like post-COVID. This was back in May, by the way. So they gave their talk. New Brunswick Power gave their talk. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff gave their talk, and then we were like the first, which is great because then we're not having to like wait around. But so that was like, okay, no pressure. You're the first person to give testimony. But it was good. I mean, I wrote all that out. I did the research on it. Because in Generation Atomic, we primarily do things in North America, but we have a global reach, we have global partners. Um, and I'm a big fan of can-dos, so it was fun. I mean, it was great. It was a it's as I say, there's an intonation that I'm speaking with there
mm,
that I hardly never use.
mm.
Um,
But not
but it
much to do with me getting rich on uranium stocks, right?
Well, I mean, keeping a nuclear plant online is always helpful and beneficial. And New Brunswick Power, they are trying to move forward with SMR designs. SMRs are very popular in Canada. I'm actually going to be speaking at an SMR conference in Canada. I was invited to go speak after this because somebody saw me and was like, "Oh wow, we need someone young and dynamic to come speak on a keynote panel with high up people from SNC Lavalin and AECL." Like, okay. So they haven't uninvited me yet. So it'd be a 10-minute presentation and panel answer question, and that's gonna be in October. I'm pretty excited for that because
Okay.
that's gonna be fun. Like
Wonderful.
a little bit different, because I'm gonna be speaking to industry, and I just want to do whatever I can to not sound stupid. So
You're gonna be fine. You do a lot of work, like a lot of research. Just
so
obviously, stay to the point. They're gonna be happy about it because you have a lot of points to make. I guess keep it condensed, keep it to the data. You're gonna be fine. Yeah, I'm sure.
yeah, I
Fine.
hope so. I mean, I'm sure it'll go well, but
Yeah.
it's still nerve-wracking, but
Mm.
all the same. So
But how do I get rich on uranium stocks? Well, something eventful that did happen among those lines last week. Um, that was good for the whole uranium sector, I guess, but also for my uranium portfolio. It was
mm,
Cameco releasing their Q2 numbers, which were good.
very
Um,
good. I
top
mean,
bottom line was good. Financials were okay. I mean, but better than
I think the
better
financials
profitability,
are.
better margins in a
They haven't been.
long while.
They have not been this profitable since 2011.
Hmm.
Like
But
this
does
is the
that
first
does that really
time.
matter? Does that really matter a lot if you're not invested in Cameco specifically? Because I
Well,
had a feeling that there's a lot more information in that Q2 report than just the data on Cameco. So what was there something else that was interesting in there that caught your eye? What did you see?
Well, what caught my eye was how many pounds Orano has been borrowing from
Hmm.
Cameco. I mean, Iran. So, that tells me that, either Orano is having issues sourcing pounds potentially. They've also borrowed some conversion services as well, but they owe something like 4.5 million pounds. And this was in the report. They didn't mention this in the call, but and they've extended this was originally supposed to be sort of a short borrowing window, and they extended it last quarter to like 2028. So that just tells me that, Orano is having issues sourcing pounds. Now, granted, they are joint partners on Cigar Lake, and who knows what that's going to be. But this is an interesting moment. It tells you that maybe supply is because I know Orano had shut down some mines, particularly in Niger. So that says that to me that supply is starting to really tighten here. And this is not the time to be borrowing pounds because one, you're going to have to pay these pounds back in the future. They're going to be more expensive. And on the flip side of that, they're pounds you can't sell either in the future because you have to give them back to. It's a boon for Cameco. I mean, really, that's an extra, that's an extra 4.5 million cheap pounds now that are going to be expensive pounds in the future. So that's another good thing. I will say, I think this is the first time Cameco has really returned to profitability in a big way. They haven't, people don't realize, like, Cameco has not been, I think last time they fell out of profitability in 2016. This is the first time that they have been profitable for 2 quarters in a row. Since 2015, and at a 15% net margin. That's nothing to be, upset about. They haven't been that profitable since 2011. So I know, and the balance sheet looks fantastic. I mean, there's a lot to like about Cameco. They're maintaining their cash position. They're not, I mean, even though they're having to, spend all this money to bring McArthur River and Cigar Lake back online, they are still maintaining their cash. I mean, they had end of last quarter, they had 1.5 billion in cash, and now they have like 1.4. So they are executing, in my opinion, very well. And I mean, Cameco is I call them the Saskatoon Uranium Empire for a reason. Yeah. They are the imperious leader of this industry. Maybe not so quite imperious, but they are, in my opinion, Cameco is sort of a bellwether for the health. And I think on May 5th, the earnings call wasn't really all that. It left a lot to be desired. This was a much more exciting call. You had more people from Cameco on this call. They had people that were there to take questions about GLE. They had the 2 questions that I expected, in addition to GLE, of course, was the capacity of Port Hope conversion, which they're still dancing around. But other than that, it seems like they had more people on this call. They were more excited. They were more upbeat. And for the time being, they seem to be, the most
not bearish.
Oh God, no. I mean, they practically came out and said, like, hey, well, there's $75 and there's $75 uranium, and we've seen some reports that say, needs to be 20% higher than that, and we fully agree with that. So I mean, this is Cameco coming out saying, hey, $90 uranium is and that's pretty serious for them to actually come out and say, like, hey, that's possible, because you don't throw around like wild speculation. It's not professional. It's unethical for publicly traded companies to be throwing around sort of wild ideas if they were not based on something.
I mean, is it wild or is it already obvious? That's what I'm thinking, because something else in there that was interesting to me was the talks about enrichment. Because of going from underfeeding to overfeeding and how important that is to the industry. Our very own Justin Huhn actually asked during that Cameco conference.
That's a good question.
In a question. Yeah. He thought what he asked what they thought about overfeeding. And well, actually, this relates to what you've been doing a lot of research on, enrichment, because they're the Cameco's CFO, which is Grant Isaac, I believe. Well, he told people that he does not expect enrichment capacity to expand significantly until 2028. So 2 things. First of all, that's big, right? If that doesn't happen, that's 6, let's call it 5.5 years up in the future. There's a lot of time for the uranium price to get out of hand if utilities actually start contracting. Most people that I'm talking to don't think that utilities have that much above ground stock of uranium.
We've heard that confirmed in Senate testimony this week. Dr. Huff was saying something that, a friend, of course, who I would call colleague, Clay Montgomery on Twitter, he said that, he's been waiting for DOE to say for years, which is that if we cut off Russian enrichment services, we do not have the capability to replace it at this time, and that any ban on Russian uranium that is being seriously considered by the Senate would have to be accompanied by support for the expansion of enrichment capabilities, capacity in particular, in the OECD, in the United States in particular. Because it's we're the ones that are sort of like, we have a lot of a lot of the reactors, and a very smaller portion, a much smaller portion of the enrichment service or the enrichment capable facilities in the OECD. So
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
But they're talking 2028 though, and
yes.
you talk to me about Silex, which is a company you're invested in. You're bullish on them because you think that they have a technology ready to run, basically, even though they do mention 2030 on their presentation. So do you disagree with Grant on this?
Well, they have recently talked about, they had a proposal last month, sort of something came out like, hey, we're going to be talking with Cameco about accelerating the deployment of this. Their proposals, there are some proposals that exist under the assumptions of the prior market case. So this is without, essentially Russian enrichment services being sort of cut off cold turkey. And yeah, it's, if you start like everything really tomorrow and you get the ball rolling on it, 2025, maybe by the end of 2025, you might have something. 2026, I think, is probably more likely under an expedited scenario, because what we're already halfway through 2022 right now, like what 2026, 2028. I mean, these are timeframes that are going to be here much quicker
You're
than we
kind of
know it.
scaring me though, because if you say 2025, what are some numbers that you've ran? I guess you've ran some numbers on it. Well, how much supply does that add to the uranium thesis? That,
I mean, there's just, based on the numbers that I've come up with, it's going to be touch and go, because you're just going to have so much uranium in that situation that, either my numbers are just way too, shall we say, optimistic, and that there's a far lower uranium need requirement than even I have thought of, because I was fairly conservative on that. But it's, there's going to have to be something. And I think what Grant is saying there is also based on a worst case scenario, if we're being quite honest, just because, when you start running the numbers, like we're over 70 kilotons easily just in the OECD. And we've never mined 70 kilotons in a year. I mean, this is just not, it's not sustainable. Like you've got maybe a round of refueling from HEU, which I don't think they want to downblend. You could see that in the Senate testimony, but we can talk about that in a minute. And then you have potentially deployment of MOX, but then that has its own issues. We've talked about that before. So, the thing is, like, laser enrichment has never been done before. Silex has never been done on a scale. So we don't know how quickly it's going to come about. Like, you put everything together. Yes, they've got, where is it all in terms of like the technology readiness? Like, we did learn one thing very important, and that was that the lasers are primarily developed in Australia, and the collection and separation system is done in the Wilmington facility.
why is that important?
Well, it's just showing us what is getting developed, basically. It could also be a sign that, they haven't also brought this together yet as either. So there's potentially bearish signals on Silex there as well. I like to, I have the bull case. I do also do the bear cases. So, but it was illuminating in just in from a purely informational perspective of just understanding where things are done and where the money is being spent. I mean, enormous sums of money have been spent on this. I mean, GE Hitachi took like a $600 million write down, or I think it was Hitachi, when they sold this back to Silex for basically pennies. Which is sort of the crazy thing about Silex has never had to dilute here because GE Hitachi did all the development costs. They did all the heavy lifting. And again, I go back to my understanding, like the technology works. It's just a matter of deployment. I think it is, and everything I've heard is that it's ready for prime time. And it's really just a matter of will rather than anything else. Now, we do know that Urenco is definitely going to be doing an expansion, almost without a doubt.
But you say that it's a matter of will. That's interesting too, because I don't want to stray away too much from the conversation here.
Sure.
But what you're talking about reminds me of what I sent you this morning, the Reuters article. I don't know if you saw that. It was titled "Utilities Eye Laser Enrichment Uranium in Push to Diversify." Yes, what is it?
Yeah, this sort of gets to the interesting part of it, in that based on the rumblings of what we heard out of the fuel conference, and this is secondhand, I didn't go. It seemed to be like the utilities were, I know that they've been taking stock of the situation, and that it's sort of like they don't want a second curveball being thrown at them right now, which is that, hey, just don't do anything. We'll take care of it. That was, I thought, to be frankly quite astonishing. Was sort of a perspective. I don't know. Again, this is hearsay. I'm interpreting someone else's interpretation who was there. So this is sort of, we're on the, but we're sort of down the chain here a little bit. So grain of salt with this a little bit. But it would align with what kind of makes sense in the bit of the patterns here, in that, we go back to sort of the topic of on the broader topic of enrichment. Cameco did basically confirm in this conference call what I've been saying for a very long time, which is that utilities are not going to start doing their large contracting for uranium U3O8, which, as Cameco rightly pointed out, yes, you can't. You can't get rid of U3O8. You have to have it. There's no substitute for it. They're correct. Until they know what enrichment is going to be, because again, as I've said before, that is a huge determination for what your needs are going to be. Even just when Grant says like significant, there's so many that's like there's 30 minutes of questions just there. What is significant exactly? Is significant like something that actually begins to bring us back to the norm? Is significant something that lowers our, because just having like the first 10 million SWU or the first even 5 million SWU additional capacity would reduce the overfeeding requirements quite substantially. You could go from like a 0.4 assay on your tails to like maybe 0.3. Something along those lines. I mean, it's a significant reduction in the first, because when you're on the tail ends of, pardon the pun, of the enrichment cycle, basically, just adding like, if you need slightly more enriched material, but you're already at like a 0.4 assay, your needs for feeding more uranium into the system, into the machine, goes up substantially. I'm trying to come up with an analogy for this. It's like a sponge, basically. Okay. So every time you squeeze a sponge, you get quite a bit of water out of it, right? But you squeeze it again, you get a little bit more water out. Underfeeding is basically squeezing that sponge harder and harder and harder. Overfeeding is dipping the sponge back in the water and then squeezing it again. So you're not working it quite as hard, but you're going through a lot more water, basically. And yeah, so, or you may only squeeze that sponge once and then you like throw it away. So then you have a higher sort of tails, which is like water content in that sponge that you only squeeze like maybe once or twice. So that's overfeeding, that's underfeeding. I'm trying to come up with a good way to explain that. I don't know if if the sponge analogy is a good one. But
Someone used a lemon analogy, I guess, which was better in terms of, you put one lemon in it, you can squeeze that an X amount of lemon juice out of it. If you want more, you either squeeze harder, which takes longer, but it costs you more energy too, or you just take another lemon, and that other lemon, because it's yellow, it's fitting too. So yeah,
we could also go with the lemon one as well. Yes, that's perfectly acceptable. So
yeah, what do you think happens then in that time frame to the uranium price? Because if utilities are not yet contracting today, not as heavily, that might result in a more aggressive push on the uranium price once they start contracting, I guess, because of the supply deficit here, right? And the potential for a sort of a all at once type of demand coming, meaning all utilities start contracting, or a big part of the utilities start contracting at the same time, but then you also have to keep overfeeding, basically. What does that result in?
Well, if you want to maintain the overfeeding, you're going to have more conversion. We did see that huge order for I think it was 3,000 of these containers for a European customer from a Chinese manufacturer. That's quite significant. I mean, those are several tons per container of UF6. I think it's for Orano, because Orano is bringing their conversion facilities back up, and a lot of their conversion cylinders, or their tails that have been re-enriched, those have been sent to Russia. So they're bringing their conversion services back online. This is, I think, this is another good sign here that we're getting potentially closer to the heavy U3O8 contracting, because you're going to have to have all these cylinders, and you're going to need someplace to put the UF6. Once you convert U3O8 to UF6, goes in these little storage cylinders. So and that's a lot of them. There was some speculation that this could be for a idled conversion facility in the UK. I think it's for Orano, though, because they're bringing their conversion services, their conversion facilities back up to full operating power. So that's where that's going. I mean, I think it's like to get to the sort of the meat of the question of is this going to happen really hard and quick? Where you're just going to see this massive jump in the price. It's a possibility, really. I mean, particularly for the Americans, because our utilities have less uranium in stockpile than our European friends. The wild card is still Japan. How much, what have they sold back into the market? Because once it gets to Japan, it's pretty much fuel. Or it's just, they have fuel fabrication facilities there, but so they'll buy, the at that point it's ready to be made into fuel, essentially. If they haven't already made it into pellets, it's a material that will be made into pellets. But yeah, we do know that there is the Japanese restarts. There's 9 reactors that they're going to have this year. They're operating some of them, but it actually comes aligned with my guess that I had there, which was that they were going to do it in thirds. It was just it made sense. Okay, well, we're going to do a third this year, a third next year, a third, the year after that. That could get slowed down potentially. I mean, I think there's still a feeling I have in that it just hasn't fully set in yet, the magnitude of this problem. There is, because again, it's not like, it's sort of like it's not like a tank. You're not passing the petrol stations, and seeing the ever increasing price, because you're worried you're going to run out in a few miles. Okay, you're worried you're going to run out of fuel. You're driving down the road and you're worried you're going to run out of fuel 3 years from now. So, but again, it's getting close, and this is sort of the good thing with Cameco, is that they are not just sort of front loading supply, as they would say. They're not accepting a lower price. So in some in that way, they are probably setting a very high floor for the entire industry.
Hmm.
And there's going to be a lot of higher cost producers that are going to be able to benefit from that by either one, because they're going to be the more marginal pounds that people start hunting for, because oh god, I got to go find some uranium. So I think it's good for it's a good indication for the entire industry. It's not like, we're not going to do a repeat of the 2010s
Hmm.
where we just, basically flooded the market with cheap pounds.
Yeah, we have a
Uh,
short blip of high price. Instead of this time, we might have a sustained but higher price where the producers, the companies that are able to get into production during this cycle, they make a lot of money.
I
So
mean, the big issue is going to be production and who can basically take advantage of this cash
who
flow.
are you betting on? Who are you putting your money on?
I would say Boss. I would say Paladin. Paladin had fantastic results. I mean, they still are a lot of investor confidence in Paladin, even though they did have to raise their capex spending because of inflation. It's still well within their cash balance, so they're not going to have to do another. They're not going to have to do another equity, offer to the
Yeah,
market.
financing.
Um, Boss is I mean, they're making the orders. They're preparing to start to put in the well fields
Hmm.
for production. They seem to have a mindset of wanting to beat Paladin to market, because Paladin's like first quarter of 2024, and Boss wants to be in production by December quarter of 2023.
Hmm.
So this is a good mindset. You as investors, we like to see this. That there's an impetus on management to basically, accelerate the process and get to market quicker. Because again, there's going to be a moment where, yeah, you're before if there's going to be kind of, I think, a sort of a critical moment between when say Cameco is at full production, when the Kazakhs are sort of back at full production potentially, um, and where the price is going to be really high. And if you can strike in that little margin area, you're going to get, when the price is the highest because of the lowest supply that's going to be available. Because again, right now, Cameco's their plan, I didn't write this down here, but I think it's like 2024, their production plan is 60% of licensed capacity.
Hmm.
So they still have a long way to go there. And it's like they said, they're not going to front load the supply
Yeah.
to the
Even their
market.
guidance here was far less than what was originally thought.
I
So,
mean, their favorite word is supply discipline.
but you're gonna need, yeah, right. It's true. You're gonna need companies like Bannerman to come
Hmm.
in do those.
Yes. Yes.
So
Particularly
that
for, yeah.
are you paying attention to any of those? Like,
Oh
are
yeah, yeah. I
they?
haven't. They had their recent. Bannerman is going to be very interesting because they're going to have their definitive feasibility study, um, which I believe is being done by Wood, which is a real company that does these things. So the
Mhm.
costs are going to be really good. Um, and that's coming out sometime soon here, and we're going to be able to make a more proper assessment of their costs. Um, and what kind of uranium price they actually are going to need. Uh, we have a guess. We think it's like about $65-$75, somewhere around there is where they really need to get to move forward. But absolutely, they're going to be needed. I still think global is another one's going to be needed.
Yeah.
We're hearing good things, even from some of the Americans. I mean, we've seen UECs. I think they announced that they've done some well fields, monitoring wells.
I've got URG. That's one of my American plays that I
You
really
are, yeah, they are. Their URG is not going to produce the most amount of pounds, but they will produce. Have
they
a
are I really like the team.
Yeah.
So for disclaimer, honest confession, I'm talking my book because I own their stock, but I really like the team. Even after Jeff Glenda stepped down, it's
Hmm.
John Cash. Now I'm talking to their CEO soon, by the way, in a couple of weeks. I have it scheduled, so it's an interesting company to look into. So that
Yeah.
you're gonna need that too. They are aware of the fact that they are a smaller producer. which means that they're going to be looking for M&A if the price stays higher. But they're going to need M&A in, I mean,
Peninsula,
they're going to want, maybe.
Peninsula and URG, in my opinion, is a wonderful combination.
It's obviously all speculation at this point, but
It's all speculation, absolutely
they're going to need a
speculation.
very good price on it because their market cap isn't too high. So to
Yeah,
finance it, it's not going to be as easy. And it's going to have to be something that's almost ready for production. So I know what
which we're
you're
talking
saying.
about Lance,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Probably is. I mean, I think Peninsula is an acquisition target, potentially even for Cameco. You could see a bidding if Peninsula works out, and the Lance projects are go, um, and they've figured out the chemistry. They're absolutely going to be a bidding target. I mean, we're already seeing this now for UEX. Denison came in. You know, we're starting to see the mergers and acquisition stages here. Because we've had UEC, they had a bid, and then Denison has now come in with a higher offer. So yeah, definitely. You know, the other big one was CanAlaska. They had that announcement of, granted, it's deep, but it's a potentially,
For that type of longer shots,
yeah,
personally, what I'm looking into are companies like Baseload. Again, talking my book here, I'm big on Baseload. I have a lot of shares
yeah.
because they're very shallow, and that's the strategy of the
Well, we've
they
seen where
want to
that
find
came.
something that's going to be into production as soon as possible, as opposed to find something that you can pump your share price on. This
So we've seen where that can go wrong from an investment perspective in 92E. I don't know. There was a lot of assay results that came back that weren't quite as, they had some barren holes, that it's, again, I'm no geologist here, but they were not, they sort of stormed out of the gate, and they had some excellent assays, like 2% uranium over like 6 meters or something like that.
Yep.
And they're not finding that again, unfortunately.
But these things are
And
generally much higher risk. Those are what I call a crapshoot.
yes,
Like if you find
well,
something
they're
that
explorer plays. They're explorers. Yeah, you
exactly,
know.
exactly, but they should be considered lottery tickets more as opposed to what you have like Global Atomic, all these
I would
companies
hate to use the
that
word lottery tickets. I mean, you know, I would recommend, you know, we are investing in baseload or 92E or whatever we're investing in because we understand it. You know, it's hard to say. I guess it's a lottery ticket in that you don't know what they're going to find. But, you
that's what
know,
it
we're
is.
not
Yeah.
just totally rolling the dice here. I
It's
mean,
not
it
okay. Yeah,
is.
I know what you're saying.
I
Yeah, I
know.
just want to emphasize on the
I
fact
always
that
I
they're
always
much
push
higher
back
risk.
on the gambling analogies because
Sure, it's okay,
you
but
know,
I just want to put emphasis on the fact that
yeah,
they are a higher risk than what you would get with a company
absolutely.
that you can, reasonably expect a production and reasonably expect a forward free cash.
Cameco, you know, yeah, Cameco, there's analysts that have a price target on them of like $45. You can invest in Cameco right now, and I think you probably are fairly well assured of a decent return.
Hmm.
But you're not going to get the 4, the 5, the 6x kind of returns that you can get with explorers or near-term developers that may potentially find an awesome assay result, or you know, you never know when the next Husab is going to be found. So you know, and that's the thing that I would go back to, like CanAlaska. You find this, and it's like, this is the first time that we've found something that, you know, could potentially be kind of huge. It is, you know, potentially like a tier one level. I
Hmm.
know I'm sounding like, you know, recklessly bullish on this, but um, you know, there is the problem in that it is kind of deep, however, but you know, it's exciting. There is you know, there's going to be, even if, you know, it does feel like the market to me is turning a little bit of a corner in terms of the narrative. In that, you know, we're finding, you know, it seems to me like the producers, the developers, or near-term producers, developers, and explorers, they're all they're getting excited because they're
Hmm.
getting, you could sort of feel a little bit of a sea change, particularly over the last 3 months. Now, I'll preface this by saying that we have not seen the volumes return to the market yet. So, like, yeah, Cameco had a great earnings, they had a great volume, but then they're back to 10-day volumes on their average volume per day on daily. So it's like, uh, we're waiting for that catalyst. And I think it's going to come in the form of, someone's just going to have to sound. It's going to happen. I could make a guess and say that, you're going to have a utility that's going to come out and say something needs to be done. Someone's going to finally break ranks, and they're not going to be, all that happy about it. And they're going to be like, I don't know if we're going to be able to keep our reactors online. That's a huge moment there. Um, you could potentially have, it just seems like you still can't quite escape the feeling that, on the enrichment side, on the fuel cycle side, we're sort of on the, at least the later into the fuel cycle side, it seems like the miners are ready to go, like at any time, like, yeah, we're geared up. We've got, in Bannerman, you practically have a shovel ready project. In Global, you have pretty much a shovel ready project, um, so they're ready to go. It's just the enrichment side of things that are kind of like, well, it sort of feels like we're sleepwalking here into this, and it's, you'd wish that things are taken a little bit more seriously. I don't know.